great morning session. That was, I thought, really interesting. I have notes. I'm going to circulate them amongst the panelists to make sure I capture stuff, and then I can share that out with people, and we'll maybe put it on the WGGL website. Deborah is under the weather today, and so her colleague Stephen is going to be presenting in her place. The one thing I also wanted to mention, in case you're not aware, this is a fantastic service that's available to organizations within the state. So this is not only a presentation to learn from, but also an idea of maybe bringing this crew into your organization. Because a lot of us work as project managers even outside of our organization. We're kind of working with other folks, trying to make things happen, and there's lots of room for projects not to go smoothly, and that's where these steps and thoughts can help make things move more effectively.
They come in and say projects?
They come in, well, they're gonna talk to you before the project goes.
Thank you. That was exactly the save I was looking for.
So anyway, so think when you're listening to this, have two hats on. One, what can I learn? But also, how would this be an effective tool or set of tools to share with my colleagues and people that I'm working with at my organization? So, without any further ado.
Well, Josh, so thank you very much for that introduction. I will give a little bit more introduction to myself. Josh, so did you bring a bio? I was like, for 14 people, I think I can cover it. And thank you for actually reminding me of the most important point that I usually forget. Not the most important point overall, but the most important point that I usually forget to say. Josh said our services as lien specialists out of the state auditor's office are available to any local government in the state of Washington free of charge. That's the last part that we really needed to get in there, right? So you're not going to your budget people and saying, how do we get a consultant fee out of some pool somewhere? We provide our services. Our services are covered by funds coming from other sources. We get paid, not by you. So thank you for that reminder for that thing that I usually forget to say. And as I think everybody knows by now, my colleague Deborah Hentz is under the weather today. I got the email yesterday morning. She said, Stephen, you know that thing that we've been talking about for months? Guess what? You're going to get to cover it. And as we were discussing before, Deborah and I we don't have a standard presentation. Each presentation that each one of us does is really customized, and I was working on customizing this presentation this morning. So with that in mind, I might have to ask your forbearance at a point. As I was driving up here from Olympia, I thought, that case study, I probably don't need that for this group, and I want the time at the end, so at some point you'll get the, zip, zip, zip through a bunch of slides. The reason I really want to do that is I noticed sort of your format for the morning was really sort of panel discussion, and I was really as I got thinking about it more, I really want to try to allow some really a substantial amount of time, maybe 15 or even 20 minutes at the end, for some really good discussion, because I think there might be a really good opportunity to explore some of these ideas and kind of share experiences. As we were saying, I am from the state auditor's office, thanks to our lovely elected leader, Pat McCarthy. Always a little bit of a question, like, why is the state auditor's office involved in this? Like, that's kind of, okay, right? There's all sorts of strange things in state government. Why this one? The state auditor's office vision is really for increased trust in government. And so one of our strategic goals is to really assist state and local governments to be fiscally accountable and high-performing organizations, right? So this is one thing that I know Pat is really, really passionate about, is sort of trying to get away from that gotcha attitude. The state auditor's office is there to uncover small variances from norms and really kind of beat people up with that. But really to elevate the idea that the purpose of the state auditor's office is to increase trust in government. And we can do that as much by assisting governments as by sort of the formal audit side of the house. So I'm from a small team within the state auditor's office. a group of about 10 people now called the Center for Government Innovation, which is still a little bit of a new name for us. We were relatively recently rebranded. We used to be called the Local Government Performance Center. You might have heard of us in that incarnation. And there you can see, right, we are really one of those service branches, right, really trying to meet government's needs. We do that in a bunch of different ways, by providing training and facilitation, by doing some coaching, by building resources and other tools for local governments to use, and really then also being sort of a key node for various kinds of communications between national organizations in this sort of government innovation space and local governments in Washington. So even though we sort of, state auditors sort of makes you think about like big marble buildings in Olympia, our world is really city halls around the state, right? Deborah and I and our teammates really kind of, we feel like we're in the trenches with you, right? That's the world that we know, that we've gotten to know, our people, our connections. I'm going to highlight just one other non-lean tool that the Center for Government Innovation's really, really proud of, and we want to encourage you to go out and look at, because it's very GIS-ish. Right, it's got lots of GIS behind it. It's called the Financial Intelligence Tool. You'll find all sorts of links right off of the SAO homepage. And what it allows you to do is to really dive into that enormous database of financial data that the state auditor's office collects using a GIS interface. So you can enter an address, and it takes you to all of the local governments that tax on that address, and then you can dig into the financial data on each one of those local governments and understand something about their current financial health, their history of audit reports and findings, their financial health indicators, how they structure their finances, all sorts of really rich, juicy financial data that's actually got a lot of visualization and a lot of, it's not just a big spreadsheet, right? It's actually made very user-friendly. So FIT has existed before, but this is actually a major refresh and upgrade. So you can go in by address, or you can say, I want to see all of the school districts in the whole state, and then you can start like looking at school districts. So all sorts of fun stuff there, but not the focus of this presentation. So you might know this, because I know like there was somebody from Rivercom. Who's our Rivercom person? No, Rivercom is not in the room at the moment. But you might be familiar, being good local government folks working with your colleagues. There's actually 37 different kinds of local government in the state, and 2,000 different entities. So, and we're proud and available to work with any of those, from health districts and library districts to cemetery districts and those very, very small mosquito districts. So they're all out there, and they're good friends of ours. So we did take a little bit of a look at your website and your information. We understand that the presentation today is really kind of going to zoom in and really support that idea that you're really trying to share management skills and knowledge, and so that's kind of our great connection to what you're doing. Whoops. Oh, no, I didn't go 2 steps. I did 1. So there we go. So I'm going to, I've already done a little bit of introduction about the Center for Government Innovation. Let me just take 1 more minute to introduce myself, the bio that I wasn't able to provide in advance. I've worked with the center for about 1.5 years. Deborah, my colleague, has been working with the center as a lean specialist for about 6 years. So we've actually got a fair bit, between the two of us, a fair bit of experience doing this kind of work with local governments. Prior to joining the center, I actually had my own business, a consulting firm, for about 1.5 years or 2 years, again, doing this process improvement work with local governments. And prior to that, my training is as a cultural anthropologist. I'm a political anthropologist, did all sorts of stuff on sort of national policy initiatives and how they're reflected at the local level in West Africa. and looking at cultural diversity and community development issues, various aspects of political anthropology. So I did research and publication, and I taught at the university level for a number of years before finding this transition, and find a lot of really great connections between that skill set and this work. So that's just a tiny bit about me, if we want to explore more about that. So my purpose today is to kind of just give a little bit of an introduction on some core lean principles, talk about sort of some process improvement skills and some lean leadership skills, and then really kind of dive into that conversation and really kind of look at that. So before I go any farther, I want to just kind of check. So how many people in the room might have, like, I've never even heard of lean, or I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it's much about it? One or two of those. How many people have like had some substantial lean training, kind of know something a little bit more about it? Are there any people in the room who've really had a bunch of experience doing lean process improvement or in-depth training? So a little bit. So I'm kind of in the middle of that curve, and that's good to know. We'll definitely want to draw in some of those experiences and your insights. So in many ways, the core of lean is really this idea of just taking time to improve our own work, right? That seems like a really, really simple idea, and we all know that we have busy, hectic lives and that we're always just trying to kind of deal with today. But we really need to sort of ask right up front, are we really ready to kind of take a deep breath and really kind of set aside some time to really improve. One of the core lean principles is this idea of going slow to go fast. And it's really, really an important idea for leaders and organizations that are interested in sort of adopting lean to take on board, because it's this idea that in order to make big improvements, in order to really kind of move the organization together, forward together, you need to be able to sort of take a breath, right? To slow down and really take stock of where you're going. Another way that we often kind of talk about this and lay it up right up front is that we say, as Americans, we have a real tendency to go straight to do, right? You see a problem and let's just fix it, right? Another way of thinking about it, one of my favorite pet peeves is the phrase, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution, right? How many of us were raised in an organization with a manager who said, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution? And really, or bring me 3 solutions. Bring me 3 solutions I can almost live with, right? But in lean, we really want to say, just bring me the problem, right? Let's just bring me the problem, and let's take the time to really understand that problem. And that's that sort of go slow to go fast idea. So lean, what is lean, right? So sometimes the definition is really helpful. It's a great grounding point. So lean is a holistic approach to reduce unnecessary effort and increase value for the customer. Wow, what does that mean? Kind of at the core of that is that sort of reduce unnecessary effort. If you've talked or read about lean or heard about lean a little bit, you might have heard people talk about lean is about the elimination of waste. And waste is a word that you don't see in that definition, because waste makes people nervous, right? It's a loaded word, right? And so I think it's still really important to acknowledge that word, because if you've heard about lean, you've heard about waste. And so I just say, waste is simply effort that did not meet its goal, right? If I am typing a letter on my computer, and I don't have a backup, I don't have a laptop, and I don't have a backup power source in my building, and the power goes out, and that document disappears. And then I finally get my computer to turn on, and I have to spend another hour writing that same letter. That's effort that didn't meet its goal, right? Waste is a fact of life. Waste happens. Waste can't be avoided to a certain extent. And lean is just to say, let's be more conscious of where we have waste in our lives, right? And then how do we reduce that unnecessary effort, right? Lean is holistic, and I think that's another really important point. This is a place where sort of my passion comes in. And what do we mean by that? We mean that if we're going to eliminate unnecessary effort, we have to look at the system as a whole. We have to look from its very, very origins, what triggers this process, and all of the steps that are involved until something really meaningful and valuable for the community is produced. Here's what Lean isn't. I know what my work is. I'm too busy. I'm going to just take my work, throw it over the wall, and let somebody else do it. We're going to do the same amount of work. I'm just going to offload some of mine. Not holistic, right? The same amount of work is in the process. You've just reassigned it. And that may make your life temporarily better until that person throws that work back over the wall at you, right? And then you start getting into sort of a food fight of work, right? It just gets messy. So Lean really says part of that slowing down process is to say, let's get all the right people in the room, everybody who's involved in this process, and really understand what we cannot do, right? What we cannot do. What is the unnecessary effort in this process that nobody is going to do in the future, not just reassign work. And then that last part, increasing value for the customer. And that's sort of the third sort of core pillar of Lean, is what we call the voice of the customer. So at the core of all Lean process improvement, we want to know who's getting this thing in the end, right? And then what do they really need? And to really spend time to understand that and to specify that and be really clear about it. So that's the what side of Lean. The how side of Lean at its core is this idea of a plan, do, check, adjust cycle. Yes, absolutely, please. There's room right up here. So the plan, do, check, adjust cycle, it's another way of sort of getting to that idea about slowing down to go fast. You'll notice that plan is half the circle, right? It's to say, let's be really clear and mindful about defining what our problem is, understanding our current process, making sure that we have the right people in the room, really have sort of a clear collective understanding of what we're actually going to try to change. That's a thing that we often see groups come into. They'll say, well, we know where we're going, but people are going to fight us on it, right? And so part of the process of Lean is to really get everybody in the room to build that collective vision and to really have a whole team of people understand where we're going and why, because then they're much more likely to actually do it and to follow through and implement those things. We don't do endless analysis, though. Right? Lean has a bias toward action, or a bias toward prototyping or incremental action. And so that's why sort of doing is all of that implementation and prototyping and action stuff. But the other side of it is, from the very, very beginning, we're going to assume that the first time we do it, we don't assume that we're going to fail. We accept that we might, but we know that we're not going to get all the way to the best answer, right? And that's why we really emphasize that check and adjust part, that we're going to come back after we've implemented for a while, really understand how close did we get to our goal, and what changes do we really need to make. So that's not that complicated, right? PDCA, that's sort of an idea that's been around for a long time, right? I'm not saying that this is news or that it is kind of the latest thing right off of the best brains. But what it is that the best brains understand that it's still not easy to do, right? That we do have this sort of cultural bias to go straight to do. Just have a problem, react, and never really understand what the problem is in any depth, and never really have a plan to make sure that that thing that we did in reaction actually solved the problem. And so Lean is really a set of tools and approaches, a rigorous methodology to say, if we're going to try to fix something, let's plan a little bit more, understand where we're at, and make sure that we come back and check and adjust. That we're not just all about do. We're going to really have that whole cycle. That's it, folks, right? That's the big news. Everything else is details, right? Everything else is how do you do that? What are some tools? How to get to it? But if you want to know lean, I could just I could walk out right now. You're good, right? That's what it's really about. Come on in. It's glad to see you. We're a small group. Let's find some places for folks to sit. Yeah, great. And actually, while they settle in, this is a great opportunity for me to do this. And I can check my watch as well. So we're about half an hour in. Great. We're going to pick up the pace. And that's okay. And that's okay because I told you the most important thing, right? That's the most important thing. Everything else is gravy. So you are all managers in GIS organizations, right? So I want to say just a little bit about sort of the core from a lean perspective about what we see the role of management, the role of leaders in an organization as. This is one thing down here. Deborah has a real passion around different understanding and appreciating and applying different leadership models. So Kuz and Posner, the Leadership Challenge, is sort of one of her go-to sources. So if you're interested in sort of thinking about leadership, that's one of our recommendations. But the reason that she likes that particular approach is that it integrates so clearly with what lean thinkers and lean approaches really have to say about management and leadership. And so we say we want to look to our managers and say, are you setting a clear vision and clear objectives, right? In some ways, the role of leaders is to really have that sort of big picture view. To really set that culture of learning and growth and sustainability, right? It's in some ways what I call having a risk positive attitude, that it's okay to take risks, that we'll take small risks, that we will pilot things, that we will release them in small batches to small audiences and make sure that they're working, that we'll approach and work with our stakeholders to make sure that this is going to work, but we still have to take risks and making that safe and comfortable for your group. Providing support when mistakes happen, that's sort of the flip side of the second one. And then really, and this is another sort of area where we'll really talk about lean, is that the real decisions, the best way to make decisions is for them to be made at the lowest possible level. That is, you've got too much stuff happening in your own world, on your own desk. And that means that the people doing the work need to make more decisions, but then that sort of takes us back up to the top one. Being able to set really clear vision and a clear set of objectives becomes sort of a key competency for a leader so that those decisions can be made effectively at lower levels. So some people, when they're really talking about lean, and I'm going to talk about sort of two tools in particular, but Deborah and I really like to emphasize that there are some sort of core ideas, some core principles that really make lean work. And everything else is sort of a riff or a combination of those principles. So you can see a number of these up here are really about, fail fast forward. That's really about innovation and prototyping and trying things. Systems, not silos. That's really about making sure that you have a team that crosses all of those different parts of the organization and that those different parts of the organization are working together as a system. Well, let's see. I'll say processes, not people, is another great one to pick out because it really is. Sometimes we get into sort of a little bit of finger pointing in organization. That never happens where I work. But we really want to understand things as a process, kind of taking some of that personality out of the situation and talking about it allows us to really understand how the work is flowing and really helps us build empathy for our coworkers, right? If I understand how the work's flowing and I understand somebody else's frustrations, I'm a little bit less likely to be frustrated with them as a person for what they're not doing for me. They have big, complicated lives at work as well. And so by focusing on that process, we kind of are able to let some of that personality or some of the steam around personality out. But the theme that I'm going to really use for the rest of this presentation is this idea about making work visible. That's another sort of way of thinking about what lean is. Lean is so much about getting out of this world. This is the world that most of us live in most of the time, right? We have a computer in front of us, and as long as I'm working on that document or that program or that system, it's right in front of me. And as soon as I close that window, where is it? Right? It disappears. It's a few electrons floating on some wafer somewhere that can be really, really hard to find, particularly if you put that project down and you don't come back for 2 weeks and it's no longer on your recent documents list. Right? How many of us have 3 or 4 or 5 different ways of storing a document, right? We've got a SharePoint site and a shared drive and a couple of flash drives and our desktop files, and pretty soon I know that I was working on that project somewhere, but I'm not really sure where I saved it, right? So in many ways, sort of the world that we're living in today is a world where our work becomes invisible very, very quickly. And that's sort of a key challenge. And that's why this is sort of the kind of common image that you'll associate with lean process improvement work, which is a group of people standing around very analog tools, right? Flip charts and Post-its are our friends because it's a way of sort of breaking that pattern. There are people who have tried to figure out how to do lean with remote groups on web-based platforms, and nobody that I've talked to said it actually works well, right? There is something about lean that's really very much about real people with specific names and bodies in a room together and working together and really making that work. That is really, really essential. So if you've seen a lean event somewhere else in your organization, that's probably the image that you have in your mind, a big long piece of butcher paper and a lot of Post-its. And that is at its core. That's process mapping. And that is, again, probably not news. There's other disciplines or other ways that talk about process mapping. But it is so important because it's about making the work visible, right? And it is asking a group of people to say, describe your work to this whole team. And over we hear, well, I know Betsy, I have coffee with her, I know that she's really busy, I had no idea that she had to do all of that, right? And then Betsy says, and when I was done, I had no idea that Anna took what I did and did all of these other things, right? In that process of sort of building a process map and really understanding from beginning, initiation, or request, all the way to delivery together, we understand all sorts of opportunities. So one of our favorite stories is that we were working with a local government on their accounts payable process. And when we came in, the finance department said, we really need you to help us out because we're having a really hard time. We know that we need to buy 3 more scanners, and we need to get this past the council, right? We need to get the money approved for 3 more scanners. We're sure if we got 3 more scanners, we'd be able to process these invoices much more quickly. So we got the whole group together. We got some representatives of some of the big departments that do a lot of purchasing and a bunch of the people from finance. And the people in public works said, well, I get these invoices by email, and then I print them out, and we route it around, and everybody signs it, and then I send the paper over to finance, and the people in finance said, well, as soon as we get that paper, we scan it in, and then we file it and put it away. And all of a sudden, they were looking at each other, and they were like, could you just send us that invoice? Just forward that email to us? And like put something in the body of the email, like bill approved? And they were like, yeah, that'd be a great paper trail for us. Did they need to buy the 3 more scanners, right? But that's in some ways, I mean, that's a very, very simple story. We would hope that we could come to that kind of insight, what can I say, sort of in the hallway. It doesn't happen, right? We get to those kinds of insights by getting the people in the room from the beginning of the process to the end and having them really discover it, right? And when they discover it and they start identifying those opportunities, they really figure out how to make it work. So I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to go analog. And this is sort of another way of sort of thinking about making work visible. I don't know if Jim Benson is this is baldly stolen from Jim Benson. He's an IT guy who's become sort of a proselytizer of lean, particularly in government. And he says this is another way of thinking about it, right? If you think about your own work, your brain sort of looks like that, because you're thinking about the report that you need to write for your boss and the hiring process that you're working on, and I'm planning my own vacation, and there's that project that I'm working on for finance and the one for public works, and I might be, what else am I doing? I'm thinking about my dinner plans as well, and there's the staff party. Oh, have I gotten everybody's birthday cards? I've got to do that once a month. And my brain is kind of looking like that. Jim Benson makes a couple of points about that. Neuropsychology tells us that we can remember about 6 or 7 things at a time. And once you're trying to remember 10 things, you're just fighting to remember them. This is why we keep a pad of paper next to our bed, because just before I go to sleep, that's when I remember that really urgent thing that I need to do tomorrow, and I'm not going to get to sleep if I'm trying to remember it. But he says the other sort of key insight is that actually the act of prioritizing your tasks is one of the most cognitively demanding things that you ever do. And that's really kind of amazing to think about. But he says it actually makes sense, because in order to prioritize your task, you have to sort of think about each one and sort of decompose it a little bit, right? You have to think, do I actually have everything that I need in order to even start on that? Who else do I need to have involved in that? What's the deadline? And you're weighing a whole bunch of different factors all at the same time, right? So the first thing he says is manage your own life the same way that you're going to manage your group, because you'll manage both better that way, right? You're developing one skill. And he says, so what do? You start thinking about writing everything down. You probably all have a task list, but having one task per piece of paper, because it actually allows you to move things around independently. So he says you're going to start identifying patterns in your own life. You're going to say, well, you know what, that hiring process is sort of, related to this other project. I don't need to hire somebody until I get that project approved, and those 2 budget requests are actually connected, and these white ones, those are all about my personal life. I can think about my dinner and my vacation at 6 instead of at 5. And you very quickly start sort of identifying what's going on in your own life and grouping and prioritizing them. And he says, these are your options. These are the things that you might be working on. And at some point, you're going to start doing things. And he says, now let's be honest, my doing pile currently looks like that, right? Because I've got 8 things that I've done this much on, and now I'm trying to remember where I'm at. And this is another sort of kind of neuropsychology moment, because we know from, first of all, we know that we don't multitask, right? This is why we have distracted driving laws. You do not operate your phone and your car at the same time. You do neither one of them well. We'll just focus on texting some unintended message, right? Not the driving accident. So we don't multitask well. And the other thing is, if you'll know, you probably know from your own experience that if you're working on something and somebody calls you or walks in your office, it actually takes you somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes just to figure out where you were in that task, right? So the more things that you have going on that are unfinished, the harder it is to kind of keep up with things. And that applies, again, sort of in your own personal life, but again, works the same way for your team. And so we start talking about limiting work in progress. Jim says 3 is a good number. Some people say, I can't deal with 3. I have to have 5. But set your own limit and then say, I've got room in my brain for 3 things. And then I want to know what's going on with what's done. And this was the revelation for me, because I went years coming home at 5:30 saying, honey, I'm exhausted and I have no idea what I did today. And that was a really, really frustrating feeling, right? And this work, this idea called a personal Kanban, was a revelation, because it said, actually tracking what I got done made me feel better about myself at the end of the day. And to the point where, okay, if it's a 10-second phone call, I don't write that down. But if I'm starting off at the beginning of the day and something lands on my desk and I spend significant time on it, even if it hasn't created a tag at the beginning, it gets one at the end and it goes on the done pile. Because I need that reinforcement that I actually did something valuable with my day. There's mine. It actually works. Some people, okay, now be honest. Like, I've just spent 10 minutes talking about this thing called a personal Kanban, and somebody in the room is thinking, that's a really nice idea. No way it's ever going to work for me. Is there somebody who's willing to admit it, that that's what's going on in their brain? Thank you very much, right? And I get it, right? It doesn't work for everybody. I'm not here to say that this idea, which is sort of a very simple application of lean, because this is a process, right? I'm generating ideas, I'm prioritizing them, right? I'm moving things through a process. There are all sorts of different kinds of things. And I appreciate that it's not going to work for everybody. My wife, for a while, had a manila folder that she carried around with her to every meeting, because then it was a mobile Kanban, right? It had Post-its inside of the folder. She tried that for a while. It didn't work. My point is not to say that this technology is a solution necessarily. It might work for you, but that there's some principles involved in it, right? This idea of trying to limit the work in progress and finish something before you accept to start something new. The idea of capturing everything and having sort of one idea per unit, and then being able to prioritize those units is a really kind of core concept. It's a core concept because this is this idea about making work visible. That's the application of that to one individual's work. But it works on your team's level as well. So this is a slide from the Municipal Research and Services Center in Seattle. We did a webinar together, and this was one of their things. This is actually, they use this in their office, right? Because MRSC lives in a world of lots of projects which are very different from each other, right? It's not even that each project has a similar life cycle, right? They're doing all sorts of different kinds of things. And so Tracy Burrows, as the executive director of MRSC, said, I just needed to understand what my teams were doing, right? And so there's all sorts of different projects. There's different people involved in each one, a due date. Is it on track? Is this sort of working well? Is it stressful? And then my favorite part is the workload. So the team says, over the 4 quarters of the year, what does the work feel like? And here you can see a bicyclist that's going on level ground. And here's the bicyclist going uphill. And there's the bicyclist going up a vertical cliff, right? That's what my work feels like, right? And the whole point is, for Tracy, that was the level of detail that she needed, that she can go to this and say, I just had a request, or I had a brainwave. I want my team to do something. Is there anybody who's got, sort of capacity in the second quarter to take on that project? It becomes a way of sort of tracking that and having a conversation with your team about how are we doing on these projects, and are we really remembering all of the things that we've already made commitments to, and what's actually realistic. And again, making the work visible. But this is work on the level of projects in a team. This is a different kind of process. This is a group that we worked with out in Klickitat County. How am I doing, Dave? Okay. And they said, they were renting out the fairgrounds, right? Not a large number of rentals per year, every year. And they said, everybody going into this project knew their own job, right? The guy in facilities wanted to clean up the kitchen. The office worker wanted to make sure the paperwork was complete. And the manager would go into the grocery store on Saturday and say, Martha, how you doing? She'd say, great. I'm coming out to the fairgrounds next weekend. I didn't think I was going to need the kitchen, but we got together as a planning group. Can we have the kitchen as well? The manager wanted to make everybody happy. He'd offer the kitchen in the grocery store on Saturday. Did the word ever get back to anybody on Monday morning? What happened when Martha came in to rent the fairground? The kitchen's not unlocked, and it's not clean, and it's not ready, right? And so we really said we need to focus on who the customer is and build a process that's going to meet that customer's needs. So we built a high-level process map. That was it. Not very complicated, not very detailed. And that office assistant took that idea, had a 10-minute conversation with Deborah, and came up with a standard process and using a whiteboard to track rentals at the fairground. That's all it took, because those key points could each be mapped out on the whiteboard. There's all of the rentals that are current, and the manager can walk by and know exactly what's going on. The manager's much less interested in attending those meetings about the rentals because he can check in and see what's happening. In fact, that was his quote. He said, it's a great way to not have to track somebody down, right? It's about making the work visible, and when the work is visible, you don't have to have as many meetings in some cases because you can just check what's the status of that project. How are we doing? This is the one I said I was going to skip. The really nice one is, if your IT system looks like that, Post-its are a good solution, right? Sometimes this can work really well with an IT system when you're not able to necessarily upgrade. I'm going to skip that. This is some notes about doing your own process mapping, but we're going to go on to this. So this is again, this is about making your work visible. This is a really sort of one more approach or tool, and this one I'm going to put in your hands. So this is a lean project charter. So let me just ask, how many of you, because chartering, a project chartering is not something specific to lean. How many of you use some version of a project charter for your work around your organization? That's kind of what I thought, right? There's your GIS kind of IT related. Project management and project chartering is something that you're probably familiar with at some level. And so this is a kind of another sort of core skill or tool for lean process improvement and lean management. Sure. There we go. What's up with the corgi? I'm a corgi owner, so of course, thank you. So yes, and a corgi is their owner's best friend, right? And so the charter is the lean manager's best friend, in my opinion, because it's really a way of starting to say what is the work that I'm going to ask a team to do, right? So if you go back to one of my earlier slides, I was talking about sort of core leadership behaviors and the need to be able to have clear vision and clear objectives for your team and to empower decision making at the lowest possible level, right? And so how do you do that? How do you do that in a practical way? And so project chartering becomes sort of a key tool for a lean leader, right? And you'll notice, so what is it? I mean, you can take a look at the format here. You know, sort of a narrative background, kind of common language. Anybody in the organization should be able to pick this up. I'm sorry, I know you're GIS people, it'll have 14 abbreviations in it. I don't want any, right? 0 abbreviations. Clear targets, right? And a target is not a solution. It's not, I want a GIS widget. It's how would I know if I'm a team member that I have succeeded, right? What is the value that we are going to deliver? Not how are we going to get there, but we have this vision of the future. That helps us define our target. Boundaries are really important, right? What's in bounds and what's out of bounds? What's the minimum and what are the things? Where are the rumble strips on the side of my road? Don't go outside of your lane, right? But then being really clear about what are those minimum requirements and things that are out of scope. And then really starting to think about your team. So that's a very, very simple tool that, again, I don't think this isn't rocket science and this isn't news. But what I want to say is that from a lean perspective, a charter has something of a life cycle, right? It's not about the tool. It's about how you use the tool, right? So the very first thing you have to do is you have to decide if you actually need to charter this project, because like you could charter, you know, a project 15 times a day, and I'm not sure 15 projects during your day all need charters, right? So kind of what's the threshold? What is a charter really good for? If you're doing a project that's cross-departmental or is really going to require a substantial investment of time from your staff, or has some more complicated external stakeholders. These are things where your project is going to be big enough that you might want to start to think about using a charter as a tool, right? And then I'll go to the opposite extreme, because I was talking to somebody and they said, you know, I got this thing about a lean charter. I was so excited. But it made me a little nervous, and I didn't know how my organization was going to deal with this, right? So before I took it to my peers, the other department heads and the chief executive, I wanted to be really good about, I knew what a charter was supposed to be, and I know what it's supposed to be like. So I went home and I said, let's charter our summer vacation, right? The point is they took it out of an area where there was a little bit of stress and anxiety about how is this going to work, and they used it in an area that was safe just so that they could learn about using the tool, right? So, so the most important thing about a charter is to start it, and you notice I didn't say fill it out, right? A charter is a tool for a conversation. It's not a set of directions. So the most important thing on a charter in some ways is to put a title on it and to put a little bit in the background so that we know what we're talking about, and then to really start getting that document to work for you. So it's not a big stress or a big lift for you as a manager to sit down and try to fill it all out, because you're going to start it, and then you're going to start refining it. And you refine it maybe through hallway conversations, sort of informal, like I'm thinking about this project. What do you think is important? Have you been having problems in the same area? Who else should be involved? You're kind of talking around those key questions in the charter so that you get a little bit more data and that it doesn't become your project, right? You really want this project to be owned by the team and by your peers from the very beginning. And you get that by getting their language in it from the very beginning. So it might be a hallway conversation, or it might be sort of saying, let's have a half an hour meeting and actually sit next to each other at a computer and actually put words in the document together. That doesn't really matter. The next step, once you've got it sort of pretty much there, is to really think about the charter as an agreement, right? The charter is an agreement between perhaps you or perhaps a chief executive or someone else as the project sponsor, but it's an agreement between the sponsor, the manager who has the ultimate authority to validate and authorize the recommendations that come out of the team. So there's your sponsor. They can say, yes, go ahead and do it. And it's an agreement between that sponsor and the team. And until you can sit there as the sponsor and talk through the whole document, and the team is really engaged, and they understand everything that's in the charter, and you've had a good conversation about it, it's not really a live document, right? If your team walks in and salutes because they say, I'll do it, just tell me what to do, not a really strong charter, right? A charter is a document of a conversation. And then as a sponsor, because I imagine in many cases you will be the sponsors, your job becomes to support it, but not necessarily participate, right? To support it from the sidelines, to check in with the team, to make sure that they're clear about where they're going and what they're doing, but not to necessarily be involved in all of the decision making. And then to sustain it, right? And what do I mean by that? That means at the beginning, you signed off on that charter. You said, bring me something that fills this space, right? Here's the boundaries, here's your targets, but I don't know what that looks like. You're delegating some degree of authority. We always say the sponsor does not give up control. The sponsor is important because if it's going to break the budget or break the law, we need to know and not do that, right? That is in some ways your job. Don't let us break the budget, don't let us break the law. But short of that, you've told the team, go off and do this work. Hit this space, and we're good. So then when they come back, if it's in that space, we want to be good, right? And so that's really that point about sustaining it and really helping that team then implement the ideas that they came up with, and of course celebrating it. And that can be sort of beginning to end. That can really be at any point in the process where the team gets a little frustrated or a little overwhelmed or needs a little bit of protection of their time, or just the public recognition, right? Public at whatever level is appropriate, the recognition of their hard work. So you can see Lean is really a lot about sort of these very specific tools, things about making work visible, your personal Kanban, your Kanban for a process mapping. That's a way of making work visible. This is also a piece of visual work. You'll notice that this is on one page, right? A charter that goes on for 15 pages is not a charter. That's something else, right? That's a detailed implementation plan. A charter should be visible at one glance so that we can absorb and understand all of those parts and check them against each other. If we've defined a process, we should be able to say, yeah, down in our team, we've got people who correspond to all the parts of that process. So it's a visual tool, right? It's an icon as much as content, right? It's a point of reference for the team. So I think that's kind of where I wanted to wrap it up, right? Sort of really thinking about Lean as sort of principle-based, about eliminating waste, about having this PDCA methodology, about really being careful and thorough about planning and action-oriented at the same time. And really, the theme that I really wanted to pick up on was this idea about making work visible. That is so core and so important to so much of Lean. And we have 10 minutes, which is just enough time to have just a little bit of a conversation. So there were some people who said that they had experience using or applying Lean principles. And I think the very first question, yes, maybe there's other questions from the floor. Yeah.
I've been trained in TQM and I see a lot of similarities.
Sure.
And I was just wondering what the difference was.
Sure.
Stephen,
yes.
Can you repeat the question just for the video?
Oh, sure. So the question was, somebody's familiar with TQM, and what's the connection to Lean? And in some ways, I just happen to have that slide handy. So like I said, PDCA is an old idea. In some ways, it's the scientific method. How old is the scientific method, right? And if you want to go back in the history, I mean, they actually both came out of Toyota at slightly different times. Yes, they are related. It's sort of like, what's the relationship between you and your cousin? Well, we have the same grandparents. There you go. We're cousins, right? Many of the same core ideas, some shared history, some slightly different personalities, right? Is that right? So before I get on back to my question, any other sort of top of the mind kind of what was going on questions? Any exploration?
I was curious about Kanban, and I saw Kaizen.
These are Japanese words, and yes, and some people who talk about lean, you really need like a glossary because there's so much Japanese sort of dumped into the English, and we try to reduce as much of that as possible, except where it's something like, I don't know what else. I mean, people talk about Kanbans as a form of visual management, but visual management is also a much bigger topic. Kaizen. Kaizen is Japanese, and it simply means change for the good, right? And it's actually used in a couple of ways. You'll often hear about a Kaizen event, which is the idea of taking a short, intense period of time, like 6 days a day, 6 hours a day, 5 days, straight, and locking people in a conference room and making them sort of rip their whole process down and rebuild it from scratch, right? Sort of that really intense effort. That's often called a Kaizen event. And at the same time, the same term actually really refers in Japanese, if you talk to people who speak Japanese and really understand the deep meaning of the word, it's really about discipline and continuous effort, right? Which is actually kind of the opposite of the other use, which is kind of funny. So, any other sort of top of mind questions? So I think the other place that I really wanted to go was just to ask, because clearly there are some people in the room who've used these tools or participated in a Kaizen event or learned about them. And I'm just wondering if if anybody would like to share some of the positive experiences or some of the things that they've learned or some of the kinds of projects that they've been involved in where these tools and this kind of process was really valuable and supported their team's work. Is there anybody who'd like to just share a little bit about their experience using Lean? Yeah.
I'm part of the IT group, so it's good now. But even when we were part of the IT group early on, we still didn't always see processes the same way. And we decided to put us all in a room for the week, the 5-day period he's talking about. And we hammered out some of the pain points that we had and developed good processes that we both ended up owning because we were all there together in the room. And we actually developed good relationships during that period as well, because we really kind of come out of your group and you're part of the big thing at that point. So it was really, really positive for us. We actually, Kitsap County was here this morning, not there now, but they have a lean. Andy
Hento.
He's come down and actually he got one of my GIS employees doing Kaizen, who's now studying for his black belt. He's doing lean, now studying for his black belt. And we actually employ him on just about every project that walks in the door now, whether it's GIS or asset management. We put him to work to go out and talk to clients up front. And it's been really a hugely valuable tool.
Anybody else want to? I'll pick up on some of the things that you just mentioned if there's, yeah.
It's an interesting thing. I guess for me, sometimes people think, especially if they're outside your organization, they think of your organization as one monolithic thing. And like, I think Spokane County has 34 separate departments. And at the end of the day, it's all about people and their willingness and how excited they are about their own culture and history within that department, how successful this is over the long term. So, some departments have worked great. They really embraced it. Other departments, not at all.
Yeah. So Andy Hento in Kitsap County is actually a good friend and colleague. We run in the same circles. So Kitsap County, he's actually, I believe, still is. I know he at least started in the IT department, right? So he was that's kind of was his home. If you have an organization with sort of an internal lean facilitator role, it ends up in all sorts of different places, right? Some places put it in HR, some people put it in IT, some people put it in finances, some organizations put it in finance, some organizations create their own sort of standalone unit for it. Pros and cons to all of those, I don't really care. I'm just saying it is one of those things that sort of shows up in lots of places. But it is sort of like I said, it's about the process, not the people, right? And that's what you're focusing on, and that's what you're talking about. But it's also about the people, right? Really, and I think I sort of alluded to this, it really is a tremendous way, in some ways, to kind of diffuse or to kind of bring that temperature down a little bit, because it is what I call sort of without getting too squishy, I think of it as an empathy building tool, right? It's a real way of saying, take a minute, understand, walk for at least 10 minutes in somebody else's shoes, even if you don't walk all day, right? And really kind of understand their part of this process from their point of view, and you start to kind of get much more patient and much more understanding about your colleagues and you also find ways of really supporting each other, right? Which is another sort of way of sort of experiencing that or expressing it. I think I'm going to put one more kind of very quick idea up here, because, come on. I've already said I'm not an IT guy, so or a GIS guy. I know just enough to be dangerous. So I'm going to put a few things up here, and then you guys can tell me that I'm completely bonkers and wrong, and that's okay. But I'm going to try this. If I think about your world, at some point there's a process that we might call coding or programming, and it starts with a request for an app and it goes out to release, right? There's your process of beginning to an end, scoping or request, right? There's probably something that's sort of, I don't know, like a data dump process, right? Which is sort of release to, I don't know, integration, right? You've got a running app. The Census Department releases a new version of the data that you're using in your GIS thing, and you have to do something, right? I don't know what it is, but you have to get that data from Census and rebuild that connection, right? Am I making that up? That's a thing. That's a thing. Okay, so my point is those two, and you probably have others, right? You have other processes that are your processes, right? This is your work. This is your competence. This is your expertise. And you could apply lean to a process like this, right? Okay. There's another process if you're a city called something like stormwater billing. And it goes from as-built to invoices, right? And it's, right, so it's all about taking those as-built, getting them into the GIS system, figuring out how you calculate how much impervious surface that is, getting that over to the utility billing and figuring out how much they should be billed, right? Did I get that right? Whoa, dude, I'm like, okay, right? So my point is this your process? No. This is a process that's owned maybe by finance, or it's finance and community development, right? But you're there. And then there's somebody else, I don't know, what's like, I'm trying to come up with one. There's your community engagement specialist in the executive's office or in communications who has this dream about making every city service completely transparent to every resident, and maybe GIS has something to do with that, right? And now we're kind of off into innovation land, and we don't even know if GIS is really the right tool, Do you need to be in the room or not, right? When do you need to be in the room? Interesting conversations. My only point in bringing this up is to say it's all still lean, right? It is all process improvement. So think about it. Think about what are your processes, right? Then you're the sponsor. It's your process. You own the process. You're going to improve your own process. But then if we're kind of in this world, then what do you want your role to be, right? Do you want to be a team member so that you're in the room for the whole thing? Because then you're really going to understand all of the needs and all of the requests and all of the ins and outs and all of the gory details and the grand visions and the pipe dreams. And you know what? Sometimes I've been in a room on a team with somebody, an IT or a GIS specialist, and people were like, oh, it would be so cool if we could do ... But that's got to be, that's too complicated. We're not going to even ask. And the IT person said, do you know that capacity is already in the system that you own? And the team was like, really? We could do that? And it was a revelation, right? And it made everybody happy. So my point is, sometimes if you're talking to the community engagement thing, that process or that lean project may look like, do I really need to be in this room for 40 hours on the off chance that I have something to contribute? and that's where we as lean facilitators start like sidling up to you and saying, yes, please try to be there. It's going to be okay. You're going to learn a lot. It's going to be beneficial for everybody, right? So there's some of these kinds of projects where sort of the GIS capacity, the GIS specialist, the GIS insider is super, super useful, but it doesn't necessarily, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't look like it necessarily at the beginning or at the very first blush. And so kind of offering your time to really be part of a process improvement team, even though it really can be a significant investment of time, really pays enormous dividends for the end product. That was my last sales pitch. I really got to get out of here. Thank you, Dave, for all of your assistance with the videoing and the timekeeping. Thank you, Josh, for the invitation. Thank you, all of you, for inviting us next year. You can have Deborah again, and she'll tell you a slightly different story. Unfortunately, since I was kind of called in at the last minute, I've got to get off to something else. I think we have 10 minutes. I do have some of my business cards if we have other things. There are a couple of other really quick slides in here. So this is actually a book about lean that's really written for sort of IT people. It has sort of an IT bent and a reference. Some of our other go-to sort of basic readings. And I will get all of these slides to Josh, and Josh will get them up. So don't worry about writing all that down. Here's our sort of flyer. As we said at the very beginning, our services are free to look to any local government in the state of Washington. So call us if you would like some of this. There's our contact information. I think we pulled it together.